The frozen wind cut through Josephine Grant's thin nightdress like 1,000 knives as she pounded her fists against the locked cabin door, her father's drunken rage still echoing in her ears, even as her voice grew hoarse from screaming. It was February 1883 in Bozeman, Montana, and the temperature had plummeted to dangerous depths, the kind of cold that turned breath to ice crystals and stole the life from anything foolish enough to be caught in it. Her father, Samuel Grant, had thrown her out in nothing but her nightclothes after she had refused to marry the wealthy cattle baron. He had sold her to like livestock. A man 3 times her age with a reputation for cruelty that made even hardened ranch hands look away. Josephine was 19 years old, and she had believed her father loved her enough to understand why she could not go through with such a marriage. But the whiskey had transformed him into someone she no longer recognized. She had stopped pounding on the door an hour ago, maybe longer. Time became strange when the cold seeped into your bones. Josephine had tried to find shelter in the barn, but her father had barred that door too, had thought of everything in his whiskey-soaked determination to break her will. She had stumbled through the snow in her bare feet until she could not feel them anymore, until she could not feel anything anymore. The night sky above was cruelly beautiful, stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black velvet, and she thought it was a terrible thing that the last sight she might ever see was so lovely it made her heart ache. When she finally collapsed in the snow about 50 yards from the main road into town, Josephine did not feel afraid anymore. The cold had moved beyond pain into something almost peaceful, a numbness that whispered she should just close her eyes and rest. She tried to stay awake, knowing somewhere in the back of her mind that sleep meant death, but her body no longer obeyed her commands. The snow beneath her cheek felt almost soft now, and the stars were starting to blur together. Vincent Kincaid had been riding through the night because sleep eluded him more often than not these days. At 26, he had already lived more lifetimes than most men twice his age, had fought in range wars and survived winters that killed stronger men, had loved and lost and learned that the empty spaces in his chest could not be filled with whiskey or distance or the endless movement from one town to another. His horse, a sturdy gray gelding named Ash, knew the road into Bozeman well enough that Vincent let his mind wander as they traveled, his coat pulled tight against the bitter cold. The sun was just beginning to paint the horizon with the faintest hint of pink when Ash suddenly stopped, his ears pricked forward, and his entire body tense with awareness. "What is it, boy?" Vincent asked, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle secured to his saddle. But Ash was not looking toward the trees where danger might lurk. He was looking at what appeared to be a snowdrift just off the side of the road, except snowdrifts did not have dark hair spreading across the white like ink in water. Vincent was off his horse before conscious thought caught up with action, his boots crunching through the snow as he ran to the crumpled form. When he turned her over, his breath caught in his throat. She was blue-white with cold, her lips the color of a bruise, ice crystals clinging to her eyelashes. She wore nothing but a nightdress that had frozen stiff in places, and her feet were bare and already showing the blackened signs of frostbite. For a terrible moment, Vincent thought he was too late, that he had found a frozen corpse instead of a living woman. Then he pressed his fingers to her throat and felt the faintest flutter of pulse, so weak and slow that he almost missed it. "No, no, no," he heard himself saying as he stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, gathering her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and her skin was so cold it burned his hands even through his gloves. "Stay with me. Do you hear me? You stay with me." He lifted her onto Ash's back and swung up behind her, cradling her against his chest as he urged the horse into a gallop. The nearest shelter was the boarding house run by Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a widow woman who had a reputation for kindness and discretion in equal measure. Vincent knew the cold had already done its damage, knew that even if he got this woman somewhere warm, she might still slip away, but he refused to accept that possibility. He had seen too much death in his life already. He would not watch another person die if he could prevent it. Mrs. Patterson took one look at the frozen woman in Vincent's arms and immediately began barking orders. Within minutes, they had Josephine in a bed near the fireplace, wrapped in every blanket the boarding house possessed, with heated stones placed carefully around her body. Mrs. Patterson, who had nursed her own husband through pneumonia and her son through a near-fatal case of influenza before losing them both to a wagon accident, worked with the efficiency of someone who knew that hesitation cost lives. "Her feet are in bad shape, Mrs. Patterson said quietly as she examined Josephine's blackened toes. "We will do what we can, but she might lose some of them, and that is the least of our worries right now. Her body temperature is so low that warming her too quickly could kill her. We have to be patient." Vincent found that patience was not something he possessed when it came to the unconscious woman in the bed. He stayed by her side as the morning light strengthened, as Mrs. Patterson brought warm broth that they tried to get past Josephine's blue lips one careful spoonful at a time, as the color began to slowly, painfully slowly, return to her face. He held her hand, which was wrapped in cloth to protect the damaged fingers, and he talked to her even though she could not hear him. "My name is Vincent Kincaid," he said, his voice low and rough from lack of sleep. "I found you in the snow this morning. I do not know your name yet, or how you came to be out there in nothing but a nightdress, but I promise you that you are safe now. No one is going to hurt you. You just need to come back. You need to wake up and tell me your name." It took 3 days. 3 days of Vincent barely leaving her bedside, of Mrs. Patterson forcing him to eat and rest while she took over the vigil, of the entire boarding house holding its collective breath every time Josephine's breathing seemed to falter. The doctor came twice, a gruff man named Henderson who confirmed what Mrs. Patterson had already diagnosed. 3 toes on the left foot would have to come off and 2 on the right. The fingers would survive, though they would bear scars. But the real danger was infection, was pneumonia, was the 1,000 ways a body could fail after such extreme trauma. On the morning of the 4th day, as Vincent sat dozing in the chair beside her bed, Josephine opened her eyes. She stared at the unfamiliar ceiling for a long moment before her gaze shifted to the man slumped in the chair next to her, his dark hair falling across his forehead, his face shadowed with several days' worth of beard. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with strong features and calloused hands that rested on the arms of the chair. She did not know who he was or where she was, and for a moment panic surged through her chest. "Water," she tried to say, but the word came out as barely a whisper. Vincent's eyes snapped open immediately, and she found herself looking into eyes the color of storm clouds. He was on his feet in an instant, reaching for the cup on the bedside table, his movements careful as he helped her drink. The water hurt her throat, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. "Easy," Vincent said softly. "Not too fast. Your body has been through something terrible." Josephine's memories came back in fragments, sharp-edged and painful. The argument with her father, the locked door, the cold. The endless, terrible cold. She looked down at her hands and saw the bandages, saw more bandages wrapped around her feet beneath the blankets. Tears began to slide down her cheeks before she could stop them. "My father," she whispered. "He locked me out." I tried to get back inside, but he would not open the door. The expression that crossed Vincent's face was one of such cold fury that Josephine instinctively shrank back. But then his features softened, and he gently took her bandaged hand in his. "You are safe now," he said. "No one is going to lock you out in the cold ever again. I swear it." "Who are you?" Josephine asked, her voice still hoarse and weak. "Vincent Kincaid. I was riding into town at dawn 4 days ago and found you in the snow. Brought you here to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. She has been helping me take care of you." 4 days, Josephine's eyes widened. "I have been unconscious for 4 days. Your body needed time to heal, and there is something else you need to know." Vincent's expression was gentle but serious. "The doctor had to take some of your toes. The frostbite was too severe. I am sorry." Josephine closed her eyes, processing this information. She should have felt something, grief or anger or fear, but instead all she felt was a strange numbness. She had lost parts of her body, had nearly lost her life, and for what? Because she had refused to be sold to a man who disgusted her. Because she had dared to believe she had the right to choose her own future. "What is your name?" Vincent asked quietly, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. "Josephine. Josephine Grant." Recognition flickered across Vincent's face. "Samuel Grant's daughter," she nodded, watching his expression carefully. "You know him." "Know of him. He comes into town sometimes, drinks at the saloon. I never would have thought." Vincent trailed off, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. "What kind of man does that to his own daughter?" "The kind who loves whiskey more than he loves his child," Josephine said, her voice hollow. "The kind who would sell that child to settle his debts and feed his addiction." Over the following weeks, as Josephine slowly recovered, she and Vincent developed a rhythm. He would arrive at the boarding house each morning after working at the ranch where he had found employment, bringing news from town and sometimes small gifts, a book of poetry, a ribbon the color of spring sky, a handful of wildflowers that must have taken him an hour to find in the frozen landscape. They would talk for hours, about everything and nothing, about his past as a drifter and her dreams of escape, about the people they had been before fate brought them together on that frozen February morning. Mrs. Patterson watched their growing attachment with knowing eyes and said nothing, simply made sure that propriety was maintained by always keeping the door open and occasionally interrupting with tea or fresh bandages. But even she could see that something rare was developing between the cowboy and the young woman he had saved. It was in the way Vincent looked at Josephine when he thought no one was watching, like she was something precious and fragile that he was afraid might disappear. It was in the way Josephine's face lit up when she heard his footsteps on the stairs, the way her eyes followed him around the room. "Tell me about yourself," Josephine said one afternoon when the pain in her healing feet was particularly bad and she needed distraction. "Where are you from? Do you have family?" Vincent settled more comfortably in his chair, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "I am from Kansas originally. My parents had a small farm, nothing grand, but it was home. They died when I was 16, cholera outbreak. After that, I worked whatever jobs I could find, moved from place to place. Never really settled anywhere until now." "And now?" Josephine prompted, her heart beating faster. Vincent's gray eyes met hers, and there was something in them that made her breath catch. "Now I think maybe I have found a reason to stay in one place for a while." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and possibilities. Then Mrs. Patterson bustled in with soup, and the moment broke, but the awareness remained, hovering in the air like smoke. It was another week before Josephine was strong enough to leave the bed, to take her first tentative steps on feet that would never be quite the same. Vincent was there to support her, his arm around her waist, his strength keeping her steady as she learned to balance all over again. She was wearing a borrowed dress from Mrs. Patterson, simple brown calico that was too big in the shoulders but fit well enough everywhere else. Her dark hair, which had been shorn short during her illness when the fever had made it too difficult to manage, was just starting to grow back in soft curls around her face. "I look like a shorn sheep," she had said when she first saw herself in the mirror, but Vincent had shaken his head. "You look like someone who survived something that should have killed you. You look strong." Strong was not what Josephine felt as she tried to walk, as every step sent shooting pains through her damaged feet. But she gritted her teeth and kept going, because the alternative was to give up, and she had not survived freezing to death just to become an invalid who never left her bed. Vincent was patient with her, never rushing, never showing any sign of frustration when she had to stop and rest after only a few steps. "You are doing well," he encouraged. "Better than the doctor expected, honestly. He thought you would be bedridden for months." "I do not have months," Josephine said, more sharply than she intended. "I need to figure out what I am going to do with my life. I cannot stay here forever, living on Mrs. Patterson's charity." "It is not charity when people care about you," Vincent said quietly. "And you have time to figure things out. There is no rush." But there was a rush, at least in Josephine's mind, because every day she stayed in Bozeman was another day that her father might find her, might try to drag her back to fulfill the contract he had made. She had heard through Mrs. Patterson that Samuel Grant had reported his daughter missing, had claimed she must have run away in the night. He had not mentioned locking her out in the cold. He had not mentioned anything that would implicate him in her near death. "I need to leave Bozeman," Josephine said one evening as she and Vincent sat in the small parlor of the boarding house. "My father knows I am alive. He will come for me eventually." Vincent's expression hardened. "Then let him come. He will have to go through me first." "Vincent, you do not understand. He has powerful friends. The man he wanted me to marry, Cyrus Thornton, owns half the cattle in this territory. They could make your life very difficult. I have had a difficult life before. I am not afraid of Samuel Grant or Cyrus Thornton or anyone else who thinks they can hurt you." Vincent leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gray eyes intense. "Josephine, I know we have not known each other long, but these past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your spirit, it has meant something to me. You mean something to me." Josephine's heart hammered in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I am falling in love with you. Maybe I started falling that morning I found you in the snow, or maybe it happened later, when you woke up and looked at me like I was someone worth seeing. I do not know exactly when it happened, only that it did." Vincent reached out and took her hand, careful of the still healing fingers. "I am saying that if you want to leave Bozeman, then I will go with you. And if you want to stay and face your father and that cattle baron, then I will stand beside you. Whatever you choose, wherever you go, I want to be there." Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I think I have been since you first held my hand and told me I was safe. But Vincent, I come with nothing. No money, no family, nothing but the clothes Mrs. Patterson has given me and a body that is still healing. I cannot offer you anything." "You are offering me everything," Vincent said, and then he was cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Can I kiss you?" Josephine answered by closing the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was a first kiss and a declaration, and a sealing of something that had been building between them since the moment he had found her in the snow. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Marry me," Vincent said, and Josephine's eyes widened. You cannot be serious. We have known each other for barely a month. I have never been more serious about anything in my life. I do not need years to know that you are the person I want to spend the rest of my days with. Marry me, Josephine. Let me spend my life making sure you are never cold or afraid or alone again. Josephine looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and love, and the kind of steadiness she had never known she needed. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I will marry you. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of Bozeman with Mrs. Patterson and the doctor, and a handful of other boarding house residents as witnesses. Josephine wore a dress that Mrs. Patterson had made specially for the occasion, pale blue with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Vincent wore his best shirt and pants, his hair slicked back and his face freshly shaven. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Josephine felt something settle in her chest, a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. They had been married for 3 days when Samuel Grant finally came looking for his daughter. He showed up at the boarding house with Cyrus Thornton in tow, both men looking angry and determined. Mrs. Patterson met them at the door with her arms crossed and her expression formidable. "What do you want, Samuel? My daughter. I know she is here. I want to take her home. Your daughter is an adult and can make her own choices, and after what you did to her, I cannot imagine she wants anything to do with you." Samuel's face flushed red. "What I did? That ungrateful girl ran away in the middle of the night, worried me half to death. She has responsibilities, a contract to fulfill." "A contract she never agreed to," Vincent said, appearing in the doorway behind Mrs. Patterson. "And she is not your daughter anymore. She is my wife." The silence that followed was absolute. Samuel stared at Vincent with his mouth open, and Cyrus Thornton's face turned an ugly shade of purple. "Wife," Samuel finally managed. "You married some drifter cowboy." Josephine appeared beside Vincent, her hand finding his. She was still walking with a slight limp, but she stood tall and proud. "I married a good man who saved my life after my father left me to freeze to death in the snow. Yes, I call it what it was. You locked me out in nothing but a nightdress in February, and you barred the barn so I could not find shelter. You tried to kill me because I would not let you sell me like cattle." "That is not how it happened," Samuel protested, but his eyes would not meet hers. "You are being dramatic." "I lost 5 toes to frostbite," Josephine said, her voice shaking but firm. "I nearly died. The doctor said another hour and I would have been frozen solid, so do not stand there and tell me I am being dramatic." Cyrus Thornton stepped forward, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. "You made an agreement, Grant. I paid good money for that girl." Vincent's hand moved faster, his own gun drawn and leveled at Thornton's chest before the older man could clear leather. "The only girl here is my wife, and she is not for sale. I suggest you get back on your horse and ride out of here before this gets uglier than it needs to be." For a moment, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Thornton looked into Vincent's eyes and saw something there that made him step back, his hand moving away from his gun. "This is not over," he said, but there was no real conviction in his voice. "Yes, it is," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Samuel, your daughter wants nothing to do with you. Mr. Thornton, you have no legal claim on anyone here. I suggest you both leave before I go fetch the sheriff and tell him about how Samuel here tried to murder his own daughter." Samuel opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He looked at Josephine with something that might have been regret or might have been anger. She could not tell and did not care. Then he turned and walked away, Thornton following behind him. They did not come back. Vincent and Josephine left Bozeman a month later, once she was strong enough to travel comfortably. They headed west to Helena, where Vincent had heard there was work for a man who was good with horses and where no one knew either of their pasts. Mrs. Patterson cried when they left, making them promise to write, to visit when they could. She pressed a leather pouch into Josephine's hands, and when Josephine opened it later, she found it full of coins, more money than she had ever seen at once. Helena was bigger than Bozeman, more bustling and alive with possibility. Vincent found work at a stable on the edge of town, training horses for wealthy families and businesses that needed reliable animals. Josephine, who had always been good with numbers, found work keeping books for the general store. They rented a small house on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs, with a real bedroom and a kitchen and a parlor with a fireplace. Their first winter together was hard but good. The cold still made Josephine anxious, made her remember that terrible night, but Vincent was always there to hold her, to remind her that she was safe and warm and loved. They would sit together by the fire in the evenings, Vincent reading aloud from the newspaper while Josephine mended clothes or worked on her sewing. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing stories and dreams and fears, building a foundation of trust and understanding that went deeper than passion. The passion was there too, though. Vincent was a gentle lover, always careful of her still healing body, but there was a fire between them that burned hot and bright. He would kiss her like he was drowning and she was air, would touch her like she was made of something precious and rare. And Josephine, who had never known tenderness from any man before Vincent, bloomed under his attention like a flower in spring. They had been married for nearly a year when Josephine realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but it was not until she missed her monthly courses for the third time that she allowed herself to believe it. The realization filled her with a complicated mix of emotions. Joy, because she and Vincent had talked about wanting children. Fear, because childbirth was dangerous, and she had already lost so much of her body to injury. And a fierce determination to protect this new life growing inside her. She told Vincent that evening as they sat down to dinner, unable to hold the secret any longer. "I am carrying a child," she said simply, watching his face for his reaction. Vincent dropped his fork, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then a smile spread across his face, bright and genuine and full of wonder. "A child. We are going to have a child," Josephine nodded, her own smile matching his. "Due sometime in late summer, I think." Vincent was out of his chair in an instant, pulling her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. Then he immediately set her down, looking worried. "I am sorry, did I hurt you? Should I not have done that?" Josephine laughed, a sound full of pure joy. "I am pregnant, not made of glass, but maybe save the spinning for after the baby is born." That night Vincent held her close, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "What do you want, a boy or a girl?" "Healthy," Josephine said immediately. "I do not care which, as long as the baby is healthy." "A healthy baby," Vincent agreed, "with your eyes and my stubbornness." "I think you have that backwards," Josephine teased. "I am the stubborn one. Then the baby will be doubly stubborn and we will have our hands full." The pregnancy was not easy. Josephine was sick for the first few months, could barely keep anything down, and then in the later months she swelled up like a balloon and could not sleep comfortably. But Vincent was there through all of it, holding her hair when she was sick, rubbing her swollen feet, reading to her when she could not sleep. He talked to the baby constantly, his hand on her belly, telling stories and making promises about the life they would give this child. Their son was born on a hot August night in 1884, after 16 hours of labor that left Josephine exhausted but triumphant. Vincent, who had paced outside the bedroom for the entire ordeal, nearly fainted when the midwife finally let him in to meet his child. The baby was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair in his father's gray eyes. "He is perfect," Vincent breathed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Josephine, he is perfect." They named him Thomas after Vincent's father, and he was indeed perfect. He was a good baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss, and both Vincent and Josephine fell hopelessly in love with him. Vincent would come home from work and immediately scoop Thomas into his arms, carrying him around the house while Josephine prepared dinner, telling the baby about his day in a low, soothing voice. "You are going to spoil him," Josephine said one evening, watching her husband rock their son by the fire. "Absolutely," Vincent agreed without a hint of shame. "I plan to spoil both of my children rotten." "Both?" Josephine raised an eyebrow. "We only have one child." "For now," Vincent said with a grin. "But I was thinking maybe Thomas could use a brother or sister eventually. What do you think?" Josephine thought about it, about the family they were building, about the home they had made together. "I think that sounds wonderful," she said softly. Their daughter was born 2 years later, in the spring of 1886. They named her Alina after Mrs. Patterson, who had made the journey from Bozeman to meet her namesake. Alina was different from Thomas, more demanding and vocal, with her mother's dark hair and her father's determination. She kept them up at night and ran them ragged during the day, but she was also full of laughter and light, and they adored her. Life settled into a rhythm. Vincent continued working with horses and eventually saved enough to buy his own small ranch just outside Helena. It was not much, just a few acres and a barn that needed repairs, but it was theirs, paid for with honest work and careful saving. Josephine continued keeping books, now for several businesses in town, and she discovered she had a head for numbers and business that earned her respect in the community. Thomas and Alina grew strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with chores as soon as they were old enough to reach the chicken coops. Vincent taught them about horses and responsibility and treating animals with kindness. Josephine taught them reading and arithmetic and the value of hard work. Together, they taught their children about love and trust and the importance of family, not the family you were born into, but the family you chose. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep, Vincent and Josephine would sit together on the porch of their ranch house, looking out at the land they had built together. And sometimes Josephine would think about that frozen February morning, about the girl she had been, lost and alone and left to die in the snow. She would think about how close she had come to never knowing this life, this love, these children who filled their home with noise and joy. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent would ask, always able to sense when her thoughts turned dark. "About how lucky I am," Josephine would answer truthfully. "About how you saved my life in more ways than one." "You saved mine too," Vincent would say, pulling her close. "I was just drifting before I found you, no purpose or direction. You gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something lasting. You gave me everything." They never saw Samuel Grant again. They heard, years later, that he had drunk himself to death in a saloon in Bozeman, owing money to half the territory and dying alone. Josephine felt nothing when she heard the news, no grief or satisfaction, just a vague sense of closure. That man had stopped being her father the night he locked her out in the cold. Vincent was her family now, Vincent and their children and the life they had built together. Cyrus Thornton died of a heart attack in 1887, and his cattle empire was divided among his various children, who promptly ran it into the ground through mismanagement and greed. Josephine did not waste energy being glad about it. She was too busy living her own life to worry about the people who had tried to destroy it. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. Vincent's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and people came from all over Montana Territory to buy his animals. Thomas grew into a strong, quiet young man who had his father's way with horses and his mother's head for business. Eleanor became a teacher, fierce and passionate about education for all children, regardless of their family's wealth or status. They both married good people who loved them and treated them well, and they gave Vincent and Josephine grandchildren who filled the ranch house with laughter and chaos. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Josephine back to Bozeman. She had not been back since they left, had not wanted to risk the memories that place held. But she was older now, stronger, and she wanted to see Mrs. Patterson again, to thank the woman who had opened her home and her heart to a frozen girl who had nowhere else to go. Mrs. Patterson was older too, her hair gone completely white, but her eyes were still sharp and kind. She cried when she saw them, gathering Josephine into a fierce hug. "Look at you," she said, holding Josephine at arm's length. "You are glowing with happiness. I am so glad, so very glad." They stayed for 3 days, introducing Mrs. Patterson to their grandchildren via the photographs they had brought, telling stories about the ranch and the life they had built. On the last day, Vincent and Josephine walked to the spot where he had found her that frozen morning 20 years earlier. It looked different in the summer light, peaceful and unremarkable, just a patch of ground by the side of the road. "I was so afraid that morning," Vincent said quietly. "Afraid that I had found you too late, that you would die despite everything we tried to do." "But you did not find me too late," Josephine said, taking his hand. "You found me exactly when you were supposed to, and you gave me a life I never could have imagined for myself. A life full of love and purpose and joy." "We gave each other that life," Vincent corrected. "I was lost before I found you, just going through the motions of living without really being alive. You taught me what it meant to have something worth fighting for, worth staying for." Josephine turned to face him. This man who had saved her life and then filled it with so much love, she sometimes felt her heart would burst with it. His hair was streaked with gray now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "I love you," she said simply. "I have loved you since the moment I woke up and saw you watching over me. And I will love you until the day I die and beyond." Vincent pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown her for 20 years. "I love you too," he said against her lips, "forever and always." They returned to Helena the next day, back to their ranch and their children and grandchildren, back to the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. Vincent continued training horses until his body told him it was time to slow down, and then he spent his days teaching his grandchildren everything he knew about animals and the land. Josephine kept the ranch's books and helped Eleanor with her school, always finding new ways to be useful and engaged. On cold winter nights, when the snow fell heavy and thick outside their window, Vincent would hold Josephine close and make sure she was warm, make sure she never had reason to fear the cold again. And Josephine would rest her head on his chest and listen to his heartbeat, steady and strong, and think about how far they had come from that frozen morning. They had built a legacy together, not just in the ranch or the children and grandchildren who bore their names, but in the love they had created and nurtured through all the years. It was a love that had started in the worst moment of Josephine's life and had grown into something beautiful and enduring, something that would outlast them both. When Vincent died at the age of 72, peacefully in his sleep with Josephine beside him, she grieved deeply, but she did not break. He had taught her how to be strong, how to keep going even when things seemed impossible. She lived another 8 years after his death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them carrying forward the lessons Vincent and Josephine had taught them about love and family and resilience. When Josephine finally closed her eyes for the last time at the age of 79, she went peacefully, with no fear and no regrets. Her last thought was of a frozen morning and a cowboy with storm-gray eyes who had seen a dying girl in the snow and refused to let her go. She had been so cold that morning, so close to death, but Vincent had found her. He had warmed her, saved her, loved her. And in doing so, he had given her not just a life but a love story for the ages, the kind of love that people would talk about for generations. Thomas and Alina buried their mother next to their father on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land they had built together. And on the shared headstone, beneath their names and dates, was carved a simple inscription that captured the essence of their remarkable story. He found her in the cold and gave her warmth. She gave him purpose and love. Together, they built a life that will never be forgotten. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and Alina's school educated hundreds of children over the years, many of them going on to become teachers themselves. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren spread across Montana and beyond, carrying with them the values and lessons their grandparents had instilled. And sometimes, on cold winter nights, they would gather together and tell the story of how it all began, of a girl left to freeze and a cowboy who refused to let her die, of a love that grew from the worst moment into something beautiful and lasting. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations, because it was more than just a story about survival or even about love. It was a story about second chances and chosen family, about finding hope in the darkest moments and building something meaningful from tragedy. It was the story of Vincent and Josephine Kincaid, and it would live on long after they were gone, a testament to the enduring power of love and the human spirit's capacity for resilience and redemption. Their descendants continued to gather at the ranch every summer, a tradition that lasted well into the next century and beyond. They would stand on that hill where Vincent and Josephine were buried, looking out at the land that still bore their mark, and they would remember. They would remember the strength it took to overcome such a terrible beginning, the courage it took to choose love over fear, the determination it took to build a life worth living from almost nothing. And in remembering, they would carry forward the legacy of two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and created something extraordinary together. Vincent and Josephine's love story became the foundation upon which their entire family was built, a reminder that even in the darkest, coldest moments, hope and love can still flourish. Their story was proof that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to the best things in our lives, that the people who save us might just be the ones we were meant to find all along. The ranch house, renovated and expanded over the years, but still fundamentally the same building Vincent and Josephine had called home, remained in the family for generations, a physical reminder of everything they had built together. And though time changed many things, the essential truth at the heart of their story remained constant. Love, when it is real and true and fought for, can overcome anything. Even death could not diminish what Vincent and Josephine had created together. Their love lived on in every descendant who inherited their strength, their kindness, their determination to build something lasting and good. It was a love story that began with desperation and rescue, and grew into something far greater than either of them could have imagined that frozen February morning. And it was a love story that, in the end, had the only ending that mattered. A life well lived together, full of joy and purpose and the kind of deep, abiding love that makes everything else worthwhile.